Europe in the 19th century needed raw materials to feed her growing industries. She needed more land to feed her growing population and on which to settle the thousands for whom there was no longer room at home. Centuries of exploitation by slave traders and others had proved that all these demands could be met on the African continent. Armed with trinkets for trade and rifles to crush resistance, the Europeans descended upon Africa. But it was not easy. There was resistance. These centuries of piecemeal European exploitation led to a violent scramble for Africa. At Berlin in 1888, these quarrels were ended in formal partition treaties. In this, the Somali people were possibly least fortunate of all, as their country was divided 4 ways between Britain, France, Italy, and Ethiopia. However, the Somalis did not submit themselves to the colonial powers so easily. The dervish movement, or revolution, took up arms in rebellion against the colonial invader. Their leader was the remarkable Sayyid Muhammad Abdullah Hassan. From 1899 to 1922, this giant of independence sustained a running battle on 3 fronts, against British, Italians, and Ethiopians. In his war of liberation, tens of thousands of dervishes perished to defend their homeland against the foreign intruders. Of course, many battles they lost, but many others they won. One famous victory was the Battle of Dulmadobe in August 1913, where the British Major Richard Caulfield was killed. Sayyid Muhammad's many poems record both his victories and defeats. You are dead now, Caulfield. No longer of this world. A voyage without mercy was your portion when bound for hell you left for the beyond. If God so wills it, those in heaven will question you. When you see the companions of the faithful and the jewels of heaven, answer them how God has tried you. Say to them, from that day to this, the dervish assault has never weakened. Nor, as his poems show, did Sayyid Muhammad lack the courage to admit his defeats. Here, he complains at his countrymen's failure to join with the dervishes, warns them of the subtle tricks of colonialism, and concludes that his past victories and present setbacks are no more than the natural ups and downs of life itself. With the death of Sayyid Muhammad Abdullah Hassan in 1922, however, the liberation struggle did suffer a serious setback. The years between 1922 and 1943 allowed the colonialists to settle down and rest. Now his prophecy of colonial evils came true. And once again, Somali heroes had to fan the flames of freedom in 1943. On the 15th of May, 1943, 13 youths formed the Somali Youth League. They struggled 17 years for freedom, both on the battlefield and in the political arena. Finally, on June the 26th, 1960, Britain withdrew from the Somali Protectorate. And on the day the Italians left, July the 1st, 1960, the Somali Republic was declared with 5 million people and a land area of 262,000 square miles. The longed-for day of freedom had dawned at last. But what would it bring? Political independence was won, but the colonial master still lingered in the wings. The dream of national unity was shattered by the intrigues of countless rival political parties. The country, with its 2,000-mile coastline, was left undeveloped. Neither the resources of the sea nor those of the land itself were put to use. While the politicians wrangled, exploiting public funds and foreign aid, the people awoke from their dream of independence to a reality closer to nightmare. And the politicians' answer to their complaints, yet more political parties. And the people's lives continued as before. Unable to help themselves or change the course of events, they became poor, disheartened, apathetic. It was the nomads, the country's largest social group, who suffered worst. Their life in a cruel scrub environment had been harsh for centuries. To them, independence had promised a golden age of water and green pastures. Yet independence had come and brought them nothing. No change at all. Every political party boasted its own homespun insignia in lip service to a national commitment. But in the pitifully few schools of the country, the language and cultures were still foreign, English or Italian. Debate raged over when and how Somali language and culture could be introduced, yet it remained only debate.
Serpente, sedia, sabbia, sapone, serpente, sedia, sabbia, sasso.
By now, Somalia had almost 90 political parties. At the March election of 1969, 74 of them put up 2,214 candidates to contest 123 parliamentary seats. Just how absurd this system was can be seen in the small town of Buleburde, where a total of 26 parties contested the 1969 election. Some 38,000 people voted, and of these, only 18,000 voted for successful candidates, leaving a 20,000 majority unrepresented. Most of these nomadic people had traveled considerable distances, leaving their livestock and belongings behind to come and vote, often for men of their clan, men who offered them the earth, who bribed them, men of whose political ideals they knew little and understood less. In both the 64 and the 69 elections, one piece of outright deception to secure votes for the now corrupted SYL government party was to tell illiterate voters that a fingerprint or cross marked on a party emblem meant their rejection of that party, where in fact they were, of course, endorsing it. Faced with such a complex and contradictory ballot system, an illiterate nomad girl like this, pressed to come in and vote, can easily be excused in her bewilderment for crossing out the entire voting paper with all its parties. Bah, absurd. Many other ways were found to cheat the people of their votes. Ballot papers left blank by confused voters were collected after the poll and filled in to the government's favor by the SYL officials supervising the election. Then there were other tricks. Extra fingerprints, even fictitious names could be added to the government poll. Nobody would check. This, then, again, was a setback to the nation's struggle for unity and coherent development. The country was swamped and stifled by the intrigues and self-interest of its rival political groupings. And so the results of the 1969 election. The SYL won 73 seats. 26 other parties won 50 seats between them, but of these, 49 joined the SYL after a month in the hope of obtaining ministerial posts. Today's vote is tomorrow's history. The headlines blazed. But what tomorrow? Self-interest was king now, and corruption and violence ruled as law and order broke down. Then came a day, October the 21st, when the armed forces arose in a bloodless revolution to take the nation's future into their hands. On that same day, they dissolved all political parties and issued the historic first charter of the Somali Revolution. This they followed with the second charter, setting out the internal and external policies of the nation. Now there was one guide, one rule, at last, for the first time in Somali history. As the charters had promised, the people were mobilized at once in a unified bid to develop the nation's resources. And in answer to the revolution's call, the people turned over not only themselves, but their purses and everything they had to the building of their nation. Roads and communications were the first to be improved, a vital consideration if the country was to be united in its efforts. Self-help and community projects were started up and down the country. No longer was Somalia too smart under its tag as the graveyard of foreign aid. The face of the country's towns and cities was changed. Mogadishu, the capital, was here a mirror to the country's progress elsewhere. New and badly needed housing estates sprang up everywhere, set in newly landscaped gardens, or among green trees and flowers. A remarkable symbol of this reawakened national pride is Mogadishu's Juba Hotel, built entirely from the voluntary contributions of the Somali people. The crowded streets themselves point to just how the people's lives were changed. Their confidence returned. They were more secure. The streets were no longer places to avoid had been the dark days before the revolution. Numerous cars signpost prosperity now, and bustling markets a thriving trade also in manufactured and agricultural goods. For the first time in Somalia's history, her national heroes were honored as they deserved, not forgotten or ignored as they had once been. Statues were raised to Mohammed Abdullah Hassan, to Hawatako, to Dagatur. Mogadishu grew in size, in population, and in trade. Being a coastal trading city, a modern harbor was essential to her. The revolution saw to it that she got one. Construction was started almost immediately on the extension and modernization of Mogadishu port, preparing it for a rapid expansion of the country's foreign trade. The revolution permeated Somali agriculture as well, straining to make people wake up to the value of their rich and fertile soil. Land development programs were started with the aim of making the country self-sufficient in basic foodstuffs while, at the same time, providing thousands with employment. Fertilization and mechanization were introduced on a wider scale than ever before by pooling cooperative resources. Canalization was extended also to make the widest possible use of the country's reliable water resources. Of post-colonial decay had taught the Somali people the hardest yet clearest political lesson of all. Political independence for them would remain just a meaningless slogan for as long as they were unable to rely on themselves alone to assure the basic means of survival. Typical of this conviction was the new government's determination to develop Somalia's rice-growing potential. Never before had this basic national foodstuff been grown successfully at home. Experimental farms had been set up under the revolution, and tests there proved that quite a variety of different rice strains could be grown. So successful were their findings that Somalia today is approaching complete self-sufficiency in rice, saving her slender hard currency resources for other things. In the same way, various types of maize have been grown locally and to everyone's benefit. Before the revolution, only the large independent farmers grew cereals, being also rich enough to buy up the crops of small farmers and store everything until the dry season when they could resell it to profit. Today, the government has taken over this function, ensuring cheap cereal supplies for everyone. Alongside the revolution in the fields has come a revolution in agricultural industry. Factories such as this, making pasta in machinery bought with money saved on crop imports, have sprung up to produce Somalia's own processed foods more cheaply than ever before. This factory, recently built in Mogadishu, manufactures the entire range of pasta products, spaghetti, macaroni, rigati, and the rest. And production today is such that costly imports are no longer needed. Tomatoes and other fruit crops have also benefited from the government's agricultural policies, showing vastly increased production. Today at Afgoy, the E-Top factory processes and cans many thousand tons a year for home consumption and for Somalia's growing agricultural export markets. Bananas today are Somalia's second largest export. Yet in colonial times, the plantations were the exclusive province of the Europeans, who limited their development to meet the import needs of the colonial mother country alone. This policy has changed now. Production has been increased many times and markets are expanding to match. Furthermore, today, government investment grants have enabled even the poorest of farmers to grow bananas, where before the revolution they lacked both capital and machinery. Today, quality control and packaging plants are being set up throughout the fertile south of Somalia to meet the stringent demands of this rapidly growing trade. Somalia's banana exports can now be measured in tens of thousands of tons a year to markets lying as far afield as Europe, East and West, the Middle East and Africa itself. Another basic crop more widespread since the revolution is sesame. And here again, sesame oil, once imported at great cost, is now processed inside Somalia. Experimental tobacco plantations also were successfully laid out in various parts of the country. Work on them clearly established tobacco as a feasible national crop, and further plantations were laid down. Backing the tobacco plantations came a large cigarette factory in Mogadishu that currently turns out 1 million Somali cigarettes a day and aims in the middle future to increase production further and meet the entire country's needs. The traditional backbone to Somalia's economy is and always has been livestock. 70% of her population are nomadic herdsmen, while many others earn a living from animal byproducts. Even the recent catastrophic drought did little more than dent her livestock resources. Today, constant stress is being laid on efficient animal husbandry, on regular vaccination, and improved breeding techniques throughout the country. Livestock exports to the countries of the Middle East are many and varied, from cattle to camels to highly prized goats. From their sale on the hoof here or elsewhere frozen, canned or processed, Somalia earns no less than 70% of her present hard currency revenue. As with agriculture, animal byproducts have formed the basis for new domestic industries. Where previously hides had been sold unprocessed both at home and abroad, the revolution set up shoe factories, for example, to create pools of skilled employment while supplying both home and growing foreign markets. Factories like this, with many sedentary workers, have still a further social value. They offer a chance of employment to the disabled, enabling them as well to play a satisfying and productive part in the life of the community. Nor, of course, are shoes the only leather goods made. From handbags to upholstery, the list is endless.